The history of the Holy Bible through objects that tell its story, and today I want to talk about a character indirectly mentioned in the Bible. His name is Alexander the Great. There are many stories about Alexander. Alexander was a Macedonian conqueror who also had ties with Greece. Hence, we speak of the Greco-Macedonian Empire, which, in the 4th century BC, dominated a large part of the ancient world. For example, Alexander's empire conquered and overthrew the great power of Persia, then dominated Egypt, Macedonia, the Greek region, and the region of Israel. He also controlled what is today Syria and reached as far as India, conquering over 5,000 kilometers in a straight line. He never returned, he just kept conquering. The story of Alexander is fascinating and deserves to be known. He was one of the most interesting and intriguing conquerors of the past. As I mentioned, he is not directly mentioned in the Bible, but we have an indirect reference to him in the prophecies of Daniel. I will read it to you. He appears indirectly in 3 prophecies of Daniel. He appears in the prophecy of chapter 2, where Nebuchadnezzar has a dream of a statue. The head of the statue was pure gold, the chest and arms were silver, the belly and thighs were bronze, the legs were iron, and the feet were iron mixed with clay. Biblical commentators have long understood that the bronze belly and thighs of the statue represent the dominion and conquests of Alexander the Great. Also, if you look in your Bible in Daniel chapter 7, there is a mention of 4 animals representing 4 dominions over humanity. The first is a lion with wings representing Babylon, the second is a bear representing Medo-Persia, the third animal is a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings, representing Alexander the Great. I will read this part for you, it is in Daniel chapter 7, verse 6. After this, I looked, and there was another beast, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Commentators understand that this refers to the Greco-Macedonian Empire of Alexander the Great. The 4 wings symbolize the speed with which Alexander conquered territories, from Macedonia to India. The 4 heads represent the division of Alexander's empire after his death. Although his wife, Roxana, was pregnant and had a son, the child was killed as a young child. So Alexander had no heir to leave in power, and his kingdom was divided among his 4 generals, Cassander, Seleucus, Ptolemy, and Lysimachus. These generals divided the empire Alexander had conquered. For example, Ptolemy took control of Egypt, and a descendant of Ptolemy, Cleopatra, became famous as the Queen of Egypt. Interestingly, Cleopatra was not Egyptian. She was Greek, descended from Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals who received that part of his kingdom to manage. In our museum, we have artifacts from both the era of the Egyptian pharaohs and the Hellenistic period, including mummies and funerary masks from the Ptolemaic era. In chapter 7 of Daniel, Daniel himself receives the interpretation of his vision. I will read it for you, Daniel 7, verse 15. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts, which are 4 kings which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Alexander the Great was one of these 4 kingdoms that arose from the earth. In chapter 8, the prophecy becomes even more explicit. Daniel sees 2 animals, a ram with 2 horns, one longer than the other. The longer one grew later. The ram pushed westward, northward, and southward, and no beast could withstand him. He did as he pleased and became great. This ram with 2 horns represents the Medo-Persian Empire. Then, a goat with a notable horn between its eyes comes from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. The goat attacks the ram and breaks its 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it, and the goat grew very great. But when it was at its strongest, the great horn was broken, and 4 notable ones came up in its place. The goat represents the king of Greece, and the notable horn is the first king, Alexander the Great. The 4 horns that replace the broken one are the 4 kingdoms that arose from Alexander's empire after his death. Alexander was the son of Olympias and Philip of Macedonia. Philip was a difficult man, and Olympias, though cunning, suffered much violence from him. When Alexander was born, Philip treated him harshly. As Alexander grew, he had a strong desire to conquer. Once, when Philip returned from battle, Alexander was crying. Philip, angry, asked why he was crying and slapped him. Alexander replied, "I'm crying because you are conquering everything, and when I grow up, there will be nothing left for me to conquer." This warrior spirit was evident even in his youth. Olympias, to protect her son, told Alexander that Philip was not his real father but Zeus, the brother of Hercules, making Alexander a demigod. Philip, seeing Olympias's influence, hired the philosopher Aristotle to tutor Alexander, hoping to counter his wife's teachings. Aristotle taught Alexander philosophy, but he retained his mother's mythical beliefs. During a battle against Darius of Persia, Alexander's soldiers caught Darius's troops in a vulnerable position. Alexander shouted to Darius, "It is better you surrender, for we have so many archers that their arrows will block out the sun." Darius replied, "Then we will fight in the shade." Impressed, Alexander began the battle. He believed he was a god until he was wounded, and his blood showed he was only mortal. This realization angered him, and soon after, one of Darius's subordinates, Bessus, betrayed and killed Darius, bringing his body to Alexander. Disgusted by the treachery, Alexander had Bessus executed brutally. The prophecy foretold that the notable horn of the goat would be broken, and 4 kingdoms would arise in its place. Alexander died at 33 in Babylon, possibly from typhoid fever, alcoholism, or poisoning. After his death, his empire was divided among his 4 generals. This is the terrible story of Alexander the Great and its relation to the Bible's context. If you enjoyed this content, there is much more waiting for you. Comment and subscribe for more. A big hug and see you next time.